come a man, a big broad, I could see him as pretty as I'm looking at you. Come all the way down that ditch bank. Kept looking at the man. He's looking in the ditch just like there's somebody in that ditch. And you know how a man would walk. Could you imagine a man, two men in the ditch ditching, and a man walking down side of that ditch looking at them men down throwing that dirt? How in the world did Uncle Pat get through in here by me up? I knew he couldn't, but he wasn't but one road coming into my place.
In southeastern North Carolina, not far from the largest interstate highway on the East Coast, the Lumbee River winds through a rich countryside, by pastures and fields, through swamplands and dense forest. This landscape is the homeland of the largest Indian tribe east of the Mississippi, the people to whom the river lends its name, the Lumbee. The unique character of the Lumbee community and culture is expressed in a distinctive use of the English language and an unmistakable manner of speech.
You can cut a tree for wood. That wood wouldn't dry out to save your life. It'll lay right down and rot. And the other times you can cut it in 3 days' time, you can make a burn.
Do you think that the Lumbees talk different from other folks?
Yep. We have our own language.
I went with a friend to church to see a Christmas play last year, and this white gentleman who was from Hamlet or Rockingham went with us, and he thought the preacher was speaking in tongues, and he was actually speaking in Lum.
Over 40,000 Lumbee live in Robeson County, North Carolina. The small town of Pembroke is the economic and educational center for the many Lumbee communities in the county and the heart of Lumbee culture.
We have several different distinct Indian communities here in the county, but you have Prospect, Union Chapel, Deep Branch, Back Swamp, Bear Swamp. All these little areas surround Pembroke. Pembroke is pretty new. It's only formed around the late 1800s, but it was mainly settled by white folks. And then the Indian people started coming in, and as the university grew, we got more education, then we started our own businesses, and then it became as a hub of Indian activity.
An all-Indian normal school was established here in 1887, giving rise to the nation's first state-supported four-year college for Native Americans in 1941, later to become the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Formally recognized by the state of North Carolina in 1885, the Lumbee Tribe has yet to receive full recognition from the United States government. The cloudy history of Robeson County raises many questions about the influences that contributed to Lumbee culture, although these questions are typically of more concern to outside scholars than to the Indians of Robeson County themselves.
We had a long conversation, and we were talking and talking. I thought the guy was pretty cool, you know. I was giving him credit for being an intellect there for a few minutes till he turned out to be an idiot, you know. And he was like, going to insist, no matter what I would say, he was trying to, you know, paraphrase it into what he wanted to say. He had his preconceived notion when he came to Robeson County. And finally, I just got tired of it. And I told him, I said, look, we know who we are, you know. We know, we have always known. Y'all are the ones who are trying to identify something, you know.
Americans in general have a stereotype of Lumbees, as they do of Native Americans. And Americans generally expect Native Americans all to look the same way and to act the same way like we do with all other human beings, human groups, and it just doesn't hold up. None of the categories will work. If there were a surviving whole traditional language here, it would be an easier case to make, especially to other native groups who do have surviving traditional languages. It would be an easier case to make for Lumbees being recognized fully by the federal government.
Well, the Lumbees have lost whatever tribal language they once had, but I still think that we have an identifying way of speaking that makes us different from any other group in the area. And I think that collective way of speaking is part of our identity, and it reflects the way that we communicate with ourselves. One of the great mysteries about the Lumbee is their ancestral language tradition. What language did they once speak? When did they lose their native language? Are there any traces of their native language left? The present location of the Lumbee has made it more difficult to identify the roots of Lumbee speech patterns. Robeson County, North Carolina, is located in a transitional Native American region where 3 Native American language groups have been a significant presence. Siouan languages were spoken by Siouan tribes throughout the area. To the west and north were groups of Iroquoian-speaking tribes, such as the Cherokee and Tuscarora. To the east and on the Outer Banks, there were Algonquian-speaking tribes. All of these language groups were in an area that may have influenced the native language once spoken by the Lumbee. Today, the Lumbee are balanced between a necessary engagement with modern life and the call to understand their ancestral history. Many of the Lumbee people seek to reconnect with a range of Native American tradition.
We've lost a lot of our Indian identity, over the years, and I think this is good to have to make people aware that the Native Americans here in Robeson County.
A lot of the things we gave up for survival. What is today? We go to work so we can survive, and we make changes in our lives so we can survive. So our people had to do that. And I think rather than just giving up the language or whatever, we took English and corrupted it to make it our own.
Lumbee English may have been influenced by a number of different groups, beginning with the very first English-speaking colonist in the area. The earliest English colonists landed on the Outer Banks in the late 1500s. Scholars once speculated that the Lumbee were descendants of the Lost Colony, the group of English settlers who vanished from Roanoke Island around 1587.
There's no doubt about it. There are a lot of similarities between Outer Banks English and Lumbee English. For example, the pronunciation of words like tide as toyd, you can hear among older people in Prospect, and you can also hear on the Outer Banks. Also, words like mamek and toten are found in both places. And then you hear grammatical constructions such as I weren't there in the Outer Banks and also in Lumbee English. But it's a stretch to say that this proves that there's a connection between Lumbee English and Lost Colony English. What is probably more likely is the fact that there was an earlier English that, because of isolation, fueled the English that developed in the Outer Banks and Lumbee English as well.
While the English colonies gradually migrated inland, the movement of Scottish settlers up the Cape Fear River and into the Robeson County area was another likely influence on the development of Lumbee English. A third possible influence came from Scots-Irish settlers who migrated south down the Appalachian mountain range and east into the Piedmont. From these diverse sources of English, the Lumbee carved out the unique dialect that today is strongly associated with Lumbee culture.
And a farming, big farms, 15 acres of tobacco. Well, I got where I couldn't get no help much from the back I quit it. And I got mad and sold my little allotment off of my little farm, and I went down the street.
Language is very important. As I talked to the reporter the other day, she said, well, why is language so important? Why does this need to be protected? I said, well, that's how we recognize who we are. You know, not only by looking at someone, we notice who we are by our language. You recognize someone is from Spain because they speak Spanish, or from France because they speak French. I said, and that's how we recognize Lumbees. If we're anywhere in the country and hear ourselves speak, we know exactly who we are.
And we were there on at a research conference in Miami, Florida, and we're out that night, and we kind of take the wrong bus or the wrong subway or something, but we get lost, and we get on a bus, and it's about 7 or 8 of us, I guess, together on the bus, and the bus driver, and this one guy sitting at the front of the bus with a patch over his eye, and he looks like he's hungover from something. And so we're just, you know, all happy-go-lucky because, you know, we're just having a good time sitting at the back of the bus just talking, and he turns around and just looks at us, and all of us are like this. And he's like, y'all from Robinson County, aren't you?
It's like an immediate identification mechanism. Can I talk to this person? Can I trust this person? Do we share common experiences? Do we have a common bond?
Even if it's somebody that's been away for years, there's something that lingers about their language that if he talks long enough, you pick it up.
Lumbee English distinguishes itself through vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. One of the most obvious features of Lumbee English is vocabulary.
And a cup of Ellick is actually coffee with sugar in it, you know. So it's like a sweet cup of coffee, a cup of Ellick. So.
Ron, bring me a cup of that Ellick here. I want some Ellick.
Juvember. Okay, that's, some folks call them a slingshot, but it's just what we would take a forked branch and cut it off, put rubber bands on it, tongue of the shoe, and put a rock in it. But that's a Juvember. That's all I ever heard until I got grown and found out they'd call them slingshots or something else, you know. But that's what a Juvember is.
Well, to me, when you mama something, you like, you just treat it bad. You like just mess over it, you know. You make a mess of it.
You mumming up them clothes. You better get all that dirt out of them and not mama come up.
And a totem is like an omen of something bad that's going to happen, or a sign of death. You can see a totem or you can hear a totem.
Many Lumbee terms are largely unknown outside of Robeson County.
Totem is to carry.
Juvember. Yeah, Juvember.
What's that?
Yeah, that's when you have a cold snap in July. That's Juvember.
Alec? Name of a person? That's what it sounds like to me.
Mommy? Not familiar with that one. Mommy can trying to act like their mama.
Now, people around here, you know, non-Indians around here, you know, they're used to it. Their ancestors are part of the reason our ancestors started the way we did. But you get anywhere away from this immediate area, people, they know it's different. They know it's something they've never heard before, and a lot of times they're fascinated by it because it's, you know, it's something different.
Little butter brine, eating laid back now.
What do you
got that?
Chicken and rice and chicken.
Set you downside of your good wife here. I want to try to look after fixing him a meal and adorning for him.
In high school, we took grammar. You know, of course, everybody takes grammar in English. And a lot of the words we use, we were discouraged from using them because it wasn't proper English according to the grammar. We'd always heard teachers that would come in outside the community would really downgrade the words that we would use. It's not proper, and you would be punished in certain cases.
I attended Sand Hills Community College first, and there was a girl who lived in the boarding house along with me. She was from Florida, and she brought her little sister, And her little sister said, "Boy, you talk funny. You don't talk right. Why don't you change the way you talk?" I said, "Well, darling, you sound as funny to me as I do to you. Why don't you change the way you talk?"
Lumbee English often goes deeper than simple labels. Many words help to define a sense of community.
Alum, that's just lingo, that's just belonging. When you say you're alum, that's identity. And we were up at Chapel Hill the other Sunday for the for Oleana's graduation, and they referred to the alumni as alums. I said, "How about that? We're all alums."
Lum is a Lumbee. You know, we refer to ourselves as lums.
For me to be able to call somebody Lumbee, it'll be for having Lumbee blood in them, for having to be knowing about their culture, you know, they got to know about their ancestors, but for like people in the outside world that know nothing about their culture, I mean, they call everybody Lumbees. There is Lumbees, they got blood.
Yeah.
They know nothing about their culture, know nothing about their ancestors. To me, really, I can't, I mean, they are Native American, but me, I really can't consider them Native American if they ain't willing to learn about their culture.
If you maintain your community ties and stuff, if it's just coming home at Christmas and from Mother's Day and Lumbee homecoming and stuff like that, it's got to be some kind of way. I mean, you know, this Heather Locklear thing, Heather Locklear ain't no alum. I don't care what nobody says. I don't care if her granddad or great-granddaddy or what it was came from here. She's never lived as an alum. She's never been involved in this community. She's never certainly had to experience the things that are just going to be part of your life experience if you're an alum and, you know, you live in Ross County. So it's hard for me to see somebody like that as an alum. To me, it's got to be, you just got to be a part of this community, even if it is from a distance, you know. So I guess what I'm saying, you got to have the genetics and the culture.
An important part of the Lumbee accent is in the pronunciation, which is mostly Southern with a few distinct vowel differences, like the vowel in the word side or ride.
Well, I got bit that one time. The snake was right there on my hand, boy. It was a black snake. We was in a backer field cropping some backer, milkweed, and killed the black snake, put him in a box.
Well, when he got halfway that little ditch on this side, before it come out at the root, I was looking at it plumb good.
Other language variations are found in Lumbee grammar, like the use of bees, where other dialects use am, is, and are.
Yeah, you know how dogs marrows down? That's how that dog be's doing.
Another difference is the use of I'm, where other dialects use I have.
And it been, I forgot what was ringing there now, but I was here by myself.
Lumbee speakers sometimes use weren't, where other English speakers use wasn't.
That's just the type of person she is. I weren't talking to him, I weren't seeing him or anything. I had a boyfriend.
But Lumbee dialect is more than words and sounds. It is a combination of verbal and nonverbal presentation that makes it an extension and expression of Lumbee culture.
I would say that the larger percentage of the time, you could tell a Lumbee by their speech, by certain words they use or pronunciations, or just the style and tone of the conversation.
Okay, but you kind of, when you spot each other, you kind of look, boy, that looks like a lum over there. And then when they say something, you know, you just know. There's going to be something, even if it's not the sound itself, it's going to be an expression.
One of the most refreshing things happened when I went to university, and I had an English teacher, and she said, one of the first few sessions we had in class, she said that the English, or the words that you use, if it's used to communicate, and if it communicates with people, it's just as right, just as proper in that context is the proper English you would expect in Washington, D.C. But she said that the difference was knowing when to use what kind of English.
I can't say that I think Lumbee should learn standard English. I think that's a preposterous assumption. Now, if a person wants to move in the mainstream and do the things that mainstream folk do, then it's necessary to speak a mainstream language. And I think a lot of people have worked out that accommodation, people who do move in and out of the mainstream, by doing both, by style shifting from one to the other.
I grew up having to be bilingual because I'm bilingual now. With my father's family, I hope I don't offend any of them, I had to speak Lumbee, you know, my birth language. But when I was with my mom's family, I had to speak, quote, correct English.
Knowing when to use the language, I think, is important, because I was always, I didn't want anybody laughing at me, and so I learned, I feel like I learned to be able to use English outside this community in a way that people could understand it, but yet when I come home, I could fit in with the people at home as well.
Well, we've been schooled that standard English is the way to speak, that an educated person speaks standard English, and that's kind of the way of the world, or I should say the way of society in America. And I think students need to know how to do that, but I don't think that it needs to be taught at the expense of losing the dialect.
That man asked me that time, says, Mr. Cornell, how you doing? I said, I'm doing pretty good. He said, what kind of Indian are you? I said, I'm a Lumbee in Tuscarora, I reckon. He said, he said, what? He said, I'm never seen a freckle face in it since the day I was born.
I was telling you about the professor from Queens College. He said, when you're dealing with business and social settings, you need to speak, quote, general American English so everyone can understand you. But when you're with your family, friends, and at home, just be yourself. You know, that's the way I am.
That man asked me that time, says, Cornell, ain't you getting fat? I said, no, my clothes just getting too little.
There's a comfort zone. There's a comfort zone. You know, I don't care where I go in this one. I've been around the world a couple of times, did a lot of things and stuff. It's just a feeling when you're back in Robinson County. You know, it's like, hey, I'm going to be all right.
What you're seeing in other tribal communities is that you're seeing that language is being revitalized, revived and revitalized. So it's a whole different angle than what's happening here in the Lumbee community, because we're not talking about a language, we're essentially talking about a dialect. But again, it's just as identifying, I think, as a separate tribal language would be.
Lumbee language is a beautiful thing. It has its own style, it lilts. When you listen to it, when you sit in a room full of it, it wraps around you. It's a very warm thing.
In the old days when we had these little closed communities, things like our language could happen. They had time to evolve, you know, and become this distinct dialect that we speak now.
Since 1887, there's been an attempt to standardize Lumbee English, and they haven't been successful. So there has to be something in terms of it being embedded in the culture, ingrained in the culture, because you would think of 100 years of public education that something would have changed, when in fact it hasn't.
Uncle Sam says we speak no native language. He says we do not live in a traditional way. Therefore, we cannot be Indian. I say for centuries, his ancestors made speaking our native language against the law. made practicing our traditions punishable by him. For this reason, many of our languages have died. Many of our own people know nothing of their culture and history. But the Indian blood runs thick and strong through our veins. We are Native Americans, Indian by birth.
With the exposure to other languages and cultures through movies, satellite television, and the internet, and the greater mobility of the overall population, one wonders whether Lumbee culture and language can survive. But North American Indian cultures have been under intense outside pressures from forces of change since the arrival of the first Europeans. The Lumbee community, continually finding refuge and strength in ties of kinship and community, has proven its ability to adapt, endure, and survive.
We can evolve, we can get to the point where our cultures can relate to each other, communicate ideas to each other and stuff like that, and still maintain our own identity. And I think our people done probably about the best job of that I've ever seen. You know, most people, when they're invaded and subordinated and oppressed and occupied, and whatever the rest you want to call it, they generally don't make it through that.